I think it started now. Okay, yeah. So, like, what I was talking about is this. So, like, this is how, like, everything happens. So, suppose you have a you have a proper backend system running. Okay, this is somewhere on the internet. So maybe this is AWS. So I'll just name it AWS VM. VM stands for virtual machine, by the way. So this is your system on the internet, and it has some IP address. Okay, it has something like this 192 dot something something something. Like it has some IP address. All right. So, like when a user wants to visit your website, and that website is stored on this system, you don't want them to remember this IP address. You want them to open a URL, right? So these URLs are like whatever URL that you want the user to open. You have to first of all obviously buy it, and then in that particular URL's dashboard, you set that particular URL to go to this particular IP address. Okay, so whatever's your VM's IP address, you just set it there. Okay, so hold on. So you basically set that particular IP address to open up when this URL is opened by a particular user. Okay, so once you do that, it like the request successfully goes to your system like that is hosted on AWS. But where inside this system is actually your website stored, that you need to handle, and that you need to handle what you need to return from when this request comes in. Okay, so how do you do that? So on a single system you can host multiple different websites, and each of these websites can have different URLs, but each of them will go to the same IP address because the IP address is only for the computer, right? So the each of those URLs will go to the same IP address. Okay, but then you need to find out like which URL was visited, through which URL this request is coming to my IP address, and this thing is done by Nginx. Okay, so I'll just sorry for my handwriting. Nginx. Hold on. Yeah. So what Nginx does is, first of all, when a request comes in, it sits at the very entrance of your system, of your system that gets HTTP request. So it is the very first thing. Like it's like the bouncer that allows people into the club and rejects other people. So like it sits at the very beginning of your request on your system, and first of all it checks which URL through which URL the request is coming along. And this is only just one application of Nginx, by the way. This is the backwards proxy thing that Nginx allows you to do. So forward proxy is when you are using a VPN to mask your location and stuff, and backwards proxy is when you're using softwares like Nginx to mask the actual location where a server is hosted. Okay, so this Nginx can now, this is like a middleman which will check the URL, which URL is being visited. So suppose I have two projects. One is called Note app, and second is called Weather app. So it will check if it is looking for if it went through Note app to our system or Weather app to our system, and then it will send the request to that particular Express backend. If your backend is written in Express, then both of those backend would be running at the same time, but both would be running on different ports. So this might be running on 3000. Hold on, the camera size is small. Okay, so this might be running on 3000, and this might be running on 3001. Okay, so based on this configuration you write inside the Nginx system itself. So whenever this URL is Weather app, it will automatically go to 3000 and give the request through the server running on 3000. And whenever the URL is Note app, then it will automatically give the request to the server running on 3001, and then it returns that particular response and it goes back to the user. So this is how everything on the internet is handled. Even like when you create a cluster on MongoDB Atlas, it's also handled in the same way. That's why you don't have to enter the port address when you are using a already hosted database. So that's about it. So
Okay, okay.
even, yeah, so even few of my projects are hosted on this system that I created on DigitalOcean. Okay, hold on. Yeah. Just a minute. Yeah. So if I can SSH into it, so I'm basically logging into my system. Okay. And so this is now my system on MongoDB, and it also tells you that it has one virtual CPU and 1 GB of RAM. And if I do pm2 monit, so I'll be able to see what all projects are running. Currently, like only one project is running on this particular system, but it is the request for this project is also going through Nginx only. So if I do cat/etc and /nginx, hold on, no, nginx. And in here, if I go to sites enabled, and in here I'll be able to see Pico. So this is the whole configuration file for the like backwards proxy thing. So it is looking for this particular web URL, and whatever request is coming from this URL, it is sending it to this particular URL. This 127.0.0.1 is basically a replacement for localhost. This also means localhost. So I'm running this particular project on 3010. So that's what it's like sending, that the request from this, it's sending to passing to this particular like local URL. And then there's some more configuration for like SSL certificates and stuff. So that is why when I like open pico.snail.dev, it like opens up properly. So that's it. Like if you want to learn about this stuff, there's a really good handbook from Free Code Camp, like Nginx handbook, that you can use. Like, I might be having that somewhere over here. Yeah, this is the like article that I'm talking about, and it contains everything that you can learn about Nginx. Like all of the basics are contained in here, so you can check this out if you want. It's called the Nginx handbook.
Oh, yes, sir, got it.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
All right. So I think yeah, so I think we can start now. And like uh, all right, so last time what we did was we wrote all the API calls, and now we are getting all the correct like information about the current weather and all. I didn't get the time to implement like all of these cards with the correct weather info, but I'm sure like all of you have already done that. But still, the infos that I'm already getting, like the air quality and all of the things over here, are like proper. And like currently it's saying that light intensity drizzle, which is the correct weather for Chennai right now. So one thing more that we didn't touch yesterday was that we weren't changing this logo, right? But we would want that the logo is also like updated based on whatever the current weather is. So if you remember correctly, we had somewhere around here we had an icon property. So in the weather, if you go to this thing, so like right now it's giving me two different weathers, because like that's the prediction that is coming from Open Weather API. But this is the current weather. So like it says that it can either be a light intensity drizzle and a mist, but these are ordered on the basis of probabilities. So I only wanted to show the first thing. So obviously like this is the like first so this is the most probable thing that might happen today. So that's what I'm showing over here on the sidebar. So now in the icon property over here, you'll see that it's a string. It's not an actual icon URL or something that's related to an image. So how do you figure out like which icon you need to show? So like Open Weather API has a proper page dedicated to just icons. So if I just search for Open Weather API icons, so you'll find out this page, which will tell you that what each of these string or codes mean. Okay, so 09 for example means 09n for example means that it's a shower rain icon, and n means that it's a nighttime icon. So there are variants for both of these. So for daytime and nighttime, there can be different icons. And if you don't want to use their icons, like you can easily use their icons by just hitting this URL. And in this URL, you can change this particular part to get different icons. But if you don't want to use their icon and you want to use your own set of icons, you can obviously do that as well. You all you need to do is find a set of icons, figure out what each of these icons are for, down like save them as png or svg images, and name them as exactly like this. Okay, so once you've named them like this, you can have them in your own project folder, and then you can use those icons instead of these in the image url source. In the image source, you can use your local images instead of using this url. Okay, so a set of icons that I found really interesting was this icon set. I found this over on like Figma's community page itself. So I'll just copy this and move it over to the designs as well, and you guys can reuse it if you want. So like I'll just put it over here, or here maybe. So the this icon also was only taken from this this particular icon set. So you can export each of these using the export button over here and save them properly with the correct name. Form this whole follow this whole table and like name them properly, and then you can save them in a folder, you can bring them over in an assets folder and import them and use them in your project. So I'll leave that up to you. So like you have some customizations, and you're able to customize it to your own taste. So I'll just leave that up to you. Okay, moving on to the Redux part now. So, like yesterday only we discussed why we need, why there is a need for Redux in our project. So the first thing is obviously that we have to dig down this particular state to all of the different components where it's needed. So I don't want to, dig down the state to each of the components. And the second thing is that I want that when I search something in the search bar and hit enter, for starters, that's what we're going to do. Search something in the search bar and hit enter. I want that particular location comes up that particular location is what the data is fetched for and updated. So if you look at if you look at its design, hold on, why is this opening up? Just a minute. So if you look at the design, so this is our if this is our app, if this is our app, then from there we are digging down into a sidebar and a stats, and inside the stats we want to show it in multiple different places, and in the sidebar is the search bar, like is the actual search bar we're gonna search, right? So if we are searching for a particular thing over here and making the API calls over here, then how do we update the state over here? So we'll need to pass the set state, the setter for that particular state, the set weather function also as a prop, and then we need to call it. Sorry if I'm missing out, but bandwidth gets very. Oh, okay. I mean, we have the recording, Ritvik, so we can use you can use that later on as well if you want. So yeah, so as I was saying that in the search bar is the search bar is the place where we're going to make the API calls and set the state, and the state is then gonna update in the app, and the whole application is gonna update because the state is in the app, and all of the components are app's children, right? So that is why this is something that we don't want. This is something that's called an anti-pattern in because we don't want the app to update every time user searches for a new location and hits enter. So what we're going to do is we're going to use global state management for this. And so as some of you might know that there is something called use context in React, and people say that you can use context for global state management as well, right? But use context is only used to how do I say it, subconsciously pass props to the child components. Okay, like this might sound a little weird, but this is what use context is for. So basically when you're consciously passing down props, what you're doing is you're writing props equals to whatever the value, you're writing a prop name, and then you're passing a value to it, right? So this is like me as a developer passing down props consciously, right? But what if I don't want to do this, because maybe there is some property that I want to get access to everywhere in my application? Then in that case only we can use context. So it can be used for things like like theme. Okay, so maybe I want a particular theme to be enforced for now, like for the button colors and text colors and background and all. But I maybe at a later point I want to change that. So in this kind of scenario only we would want to use context. Okay, so it should not be used for global state because it is also just a simple prop, and if you're updating that context value, if you're updating that value like using set state inside use context, then also the whole app will re-render because the whole app would be wrapped inside the context component, right? So that is why use context is not a good application, implementation of global state. It's only used to subconsciously pass down props. Okay, you can look into use context if you don't already know what it is for. It's also another hook that React provides out of the box. So that's about it for use context. So let's see how Redux actually works. So before starting with Redux, I would want to tell you that Redux wasn't made for React. Like it wasn't made just for React. Redux can work without React as well. Like it can work on native like vanilla JavaScript as well. So if you have a really massive project in vanilla JavaScript, you might be having multiple different JavaScript files just to separate your logic, right? So in that case also you can use Redux to update the state at one single place and access it from multiple different locations. Okay, so what is Redux exactly? So Redux is a library that can hold one single big state separately from your actual application. Okay, so this might be your application, the square part might be your application, but Redux holds the state away from your application. Like it holds the state related to your application but separate, like it keeps it separate from your actual application. Okay, so but they are connected via actions and reducers that Redux allows you to use. Okay, so what I mean by this is when you're updating a particular state, this whole state is actually holding all of the smaller state values that you want to show in your app. So like this big Redux state is holding all of your smaller state values, maybe the user's logged in state, or maybe I'm talking about a generic app. So in that case maybe the user's logged in state, then maybe if there is a cart, so it might hold the cart state, what all items are there in the cart. It might hold how much money do you have in your wallet, and so on and so forth. But all of this is held inside one single state that is separate from your application. Then you use things like actions to actually affect these states that are part of the Redux, the bigger Redux state. Okay, so how do we bring React to the picture? So as I said, this whole thing is a state, and whenever it updates, so whenever it updates, so everywhere where this value is being used can be updated, right? So in React, how do we use Redux is by using a library that is called React Redux. So it basically allows us to connect a React application with the Redux state that is present over here. So if this is a React application, this line represents React Redux. Okay, so let's just start with installing Redux and React Redux. So I'll just write Redux and React Redux, and I'll add them. And once this is done, let's start with looking at how Redux is actually designed, like how we work with states in Redux. So for this, I have a GIF that is really that is a favorite of mine. So I'll just show you that. So if I search for Redux, yeah, this is the GIF that I'm talking about. Yeah. So how Redux works is, again, it has a store or a state. The store is basically a bunch of state grouped together. So this whole thing is actually the global state that Redux gives you. Okay, and inside this store you can have multiple different states, each of which are called a reducer. And this reducer doesn't just hold this current state of any data, but it also holds the logic to update them. Okay, so then and all of this together forms the global state. Okay, which is finally shown on the UI. So here if you're looking, it has like the initial state is 0, right? $0. Then once the user presses any button or does anything, like anything happens on your UI, then in that case, what we can do is dispatch an action. So this is a click event, right? So the action that the user dispatched was deposit $10. So deposit is the action, and $10 is the payload. $10 is basically called the payload, which is like what all parameters you want to like send with that action. Okay, an action might not just be like a verb, right? So an action can be thought of as a verb, but there's is more context to actions, right? Like here it is that we are depositing $10. Maybe in a cart state you would have that add to cart and the name of the item that is added to the cart, right? So that is the action and the payload. The action is deposit the verb that we want to do, the work that we want to do, and then the value is called is part of the payload. So all of this goes to an event handler. So basically the click event handler, like the on click that we the on click event that we write in React, then that event, from that event handler we dispatch the action. So this is how the action looks. Let's just wait for a while. So the click event went through, the deposit button was clicked, and then this is how the action looked. The type is deposit and the payload is 10, if you can look at it. So once the store gets the payload, or to be precise, the reducer gets the payload, it will basically check what action, like what action type it was and what payload it is, and based on both of these values, it can update the current state with the new state. So this is how React Redux actually works. So that's what reducer and actions are. So how are we going to structure our state in our application? So I want to have two different state values. One is a config state, which will basically use for things like the unit toggle, and if we add a dark and light mode later on, like if you guys add a dark and light mode later on, then you can have things like things that are related to the UI in the config state. And we'll also have a location state. So this location state will hold things like the preferred location, like the current location which is being shown over here, and all of the other locations that the user has selected. So the active location and the preferred location can be held inside a location state, and the other everything else can be held inside a config state. So this location and config state would be part of this bigger React state, Redux state, and then that Redux state will be hooked to the application. So let's just start by doing that. I'll create a folder called store over here, not in the components, in the SRC folder. We'll create a folder called store, and inside the store, I'll create two different folders. First is config, and the second folder is what location. Okay, and then inside these two, I'll create an actions.js and a reducer.js. Okay, similarly over here, I'll name it actions.js, and another one should be reducer.js. So again, actions will hold all of the actions that can be dispatched, and reducer will hold how these actions are handled. Okay, so let's start with something simple. So let's just start with first the config. So we are able to change the config and show it on change everywhere on the screen. Okay, so the config will have only one action, that is the toggle action, right? So I'll write toggle. uh, uh, so this is the config. So before actually defining the actions, you should actually define like what all is held inside the config, right? So we do that inside the reducer. So if we go to Redux's documentation and click on get started, if we scroll down to the using Redux section, all right. So okay, once we go down to this part, so this is how a reducer looks. Okay, a reducer is nothing but a function that takes like a current like the current it basically takes the current state and the initial state, and it gives you it returns the latest state based on these two things. Okay, so okay, hold on, let's just hold on for a while. The example that I'm looking for, they might have changed this documentation a bit, so I need to search for it exactly. Just search for React Redux. All right. So if we go to the quick start section, so I think they have switched to using to the Redux.js toolkit now. So we can skip that for now because that is something that will totally skip the part how reducers are created and used. I'll just search for that example exactly and then I'll explain it to you. Okay, I think it's right here. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, this is what I was talking about. So a reducer is nothing but a function that takes the current that takes the current state, and if you want to specify an initial state, you can also do that using like this initial state value. You can specify a default value, and it takes what actions are being fired. Okay, because if we go back to this structure, this diagram over here, so you see that a reducer can get a particular action, and based on that action, the reducer runs and gives the new state value, right? So that's what this is. It takes an action and the current state value, and based on this action, it can run. You can run a switch statement on the type of the action. So based on the type of the action, you return the new state value. Okay. So a reducer is nothing but a function. All right. So what we'll do is we'll start with creating an initial state, they've done in the example over here. So what all things do we like, similar to how we used to create an initial state in the use state hook over here. Like we used to specify an initial state by using specifying it inside the parentheses, right? So similar to that, we can specify an initial state for this particular reducer, the config reducer. So the way we do it is we name it initial state, and we I want this to be an object because there can be multiple different things inside the config, right? So for now, config holds a unit, and the unit can be either degree Celsius or degree Fahrenheit. So I'll just name it C or F, and then we'll use the C or F to change the API calls. Okay. So currently this is C, or we can use metric and imperial, because that's what's gonna go to the API call, right? So this is where we are changing the units, right? So we can use that state value over here, either metric or imperial, to change this unit value, so that the API call is also affected by this state. So I'll just name it metric because I want this to be on degree Celsius by default. And then once you have made the initial state, you can create the config reducer, and the config reducer will get the current state, which can by default be the initial state once, because at the start when your application starts, there would not be anything in the state value. So I mentioned that at starting it should be initial state, and once it start getting multiple different actions by when the user interacts with this particular application, then in that case the action will affect the state. Okay. So I'll run a switch statement on this action, and its type to be precise. Okay. And then for different cases, I'll do different things. So if action dot type, first thing is obviously unit. So if action dot type is sorry, no, so if action dot type is this type is basically a unique keyword that should not be repeated anywhere in any of the reducers. Okay. Because all of the actions related to Redux are sent via the same they are all sent to the same entry point. So going back to our diagram, whenever you dispatch an action, it goes through this route, and Redux as a whole gets that particular action, and it doesn't know which particular reducer will actually, process this action. That is handled inside Redux, like inside Redux itself. So if there is an overlap of the action type name, then that will create problems. So in order to avoid that, we can name our actions based on which state they belong to. So this action belongs to the config state, right? So I'll start writing this name with config, and I usually name them in uppercase, all caps, but you can choose whatever you like, you are comfortable with. So config, and the action type is toggle unit. Okay, so this is the action, and whenever this happens, what I need to do, I need to toggle between either metric or either metric or imperial, right? So here what I'll do is I'll create a copy of this state. So always whenever you're updating a state, you'll always need to create a copy of the current state, because if you don't do that, then React doesn't identify the new. If you just do state dot unit equals to imperial, if you do this, React won't, and then return this thing, return the state over here, or maybe outside of this. Like if you do this, then React won't identify this, it won't identify the state variable as a new state, because the memory if you if you're comfortable with C programming, you would know that things like objects have a memory address, right? Objects and arrays have a memory address, and the memory address for state hasn't changed, only the contents inside that memory address is changed, right? So that is why React won't identify, or more precisely, React Redux won't identify this as a new state value. That is why it won't update all the UI. So you'll always need to create a new object and return that object. So how you do that is, first of all, you write return and an empty object. Then you spread the previous state, because this might contain multiple different states, right? So you spread, like it can contain many different states. So you spread the previous state. The way we do it is by using the spread operator. This is basically like opening a smaller container into a bigger container. So this object is the new container, and this state is the old container that holds the older state value. Okay, so then you specify the exact thing that you need to change. Okay, so here I need to change the unit to imperial. All right, so this is how we do it, and this is giving me a warning because I haven't specified a default state. So I'll do that now, default, and in default I'll just return the normal state without any changes, and this will basically run when no actions are dispatched. So like this will run to give you the default case happens to give you the current state anytime at any point of time. Okay, so this is how we can like return a new state value from a reducer. Now, this unit will not only be imperial whenever this action happens, it will either be imperial or metric based on the current value of unit. So I'll write a ternary statement over here. It's basically like a smaller if else statement. So I'll write state dot unit equals metric. So if it is metric, then it will change to imperial, and if it is not metric, then it must be imperial already, because we know that, because we are only setting it to either imperial or metric. So if it is not metric, then it must be imperial. So in that case, we'll change it to metric again. So this is basically the toggling logic for this particular state. All right, so now our reducer has been written. We can now return this. So I mean export this. So I'll do an export default config reducer. All right, so if you had only this particular reducer throughout your application, then this should have been enough. But we don't only have a config reducer, we also have a location reducer, which is different, which serves a different purpose from the config reducer, right? So that is why we need to combine them somehow, and we'll talk about that later on. But let's just first define this particular action over here. So the way you define actions are, obviously you can dispatch actions by writing this thing again and again wherever you want to dispatch this action, whenever you want to toggle the state. But the better way to do it is by creating a function specifically for dispatching a particular action. So that's what we're going to do. I'll create a function and I'll name it toggle unit. Okay, and inside here we won't have any kind of payload for this, because toggling a unit will only depend on what the unit value currently is. So this will be all clear. And here I'll return an object where the type would be the same thing, this thing. All right, so this is how an action looks. An action is just an object. Okay, we are just using this particular function to form that object. So this is this function is not the actual action. The action is this object. Okay, so whenever the reducer gets this action over here, it will check if the type is this thing, and if it is, it will toggle the unit, else it will just give the current state. All right, so now we also need to export this, and we might have multiple different actions over here. So I'm using named export instead of default export, because we can have multiple different actions and we'll export all of them, right? So now what you can do is you can go to your app.js, or a better place for writing writing this is index.js, and I'll tell you why. So here what you can do is you can import React. You can import something from Redux, and that something is called create store. And then you can import something from React Redux, and this something is called provider. Store available to the connect calls, and yeah, I think this is the one that we want to use. Let me just look at the documentation once, because like I usually mess this up. Okay, so once they have made all the reducers, I'll just go back to the quick start part, and I'll try to find something over here. Yeah, so we import provider from React Redux. That part is correct. Okay, so now like once I've imported provider from React Redux, this provider is basically a component that gives access to the, whatever store you create throughout your application. Okay, so here I'll first of all do const Redux store equals to, and a store is basically a collection of reducers or states. So const redux store equals to create store, and for now I just want this reducer to be the whole state of React. I mean, to be the whole Redux state. Okay, so I'll actually import that thing. I'll import what was it called? It's called it's in the reducer, right? So I'll import something from dot slash store slash config slash reducer, and I'll call it config reducer. Okay, and then I'll pass that to create store, because create store is expecting a reducer over here. All right, so I'll pass that reducer to here. This creates the state for us. So the reducer was just it's just responsible for changing the state and remembering it, but you still need to create a whole Redux store. So once you've created this store, what you can do is you can wrap your whole application in that provider. Okay, and you can specify a store prop over here. So you can specify a store prop and set its value to the Redux store that we created. So once we do this, we have that the access to that config store that we and inside the config we have the access to the unit store, and like we can use that anywhere in our application. So just to show it to you, I'll use it in the location selector. All right, or to be more precise, let's just use it somewhere where we are actually going to use it. So I'll just use it in the header. So the way you use it now is by first of all importing something from React Redux. So the thing that you import is called use selector, and this is a custom hook that is provided by React Redux. uh, for us to basically select parts of the store that we just created. So if we don't want to get access to the whole store, or and we just want to get access to part of it, then in that case we use this use selector. For now, I'll just get access to the whole store. So the way we write it is, I'll write state equals to use selector, and this expects a selector function, so which gets the whole state, and then it can like you can return parts of it. So I don't want to return parts of it, I just want to return the whole thing. So I'll just take the whole state and return it. And since we are doing this, I can concise this to a single line. And now I have the whole Redux state over here. I'll name it like something else for now. So Redux state. Okay. Now I can console log it and see what I'm getting over here. Okay. And if I go back and clear this thing and hit refresh, so you'll see that we are getting this thing unit colon metric, which is coming from the header line number 39, which is this line. So we are getting the actual state over here, right? And if we want to get only the unit, we can also do that. So now I'm only getting metric. Now, so the state is working properly, obviously. And now what we can do is we can we would want to change the state somehow, right? So the way we change the state is using another another hook that is part of React Redux. It's called the use dispatch hook. And behind the scenes, this dispatch and this selector use selector hooks are using code from the React from the Redux library itself. So in Redux, you can simply use a dispatch function to dispatch actions to the reducers. But in case of React, we have this this style of writing it, because the React Redux library allows us to do use them as hooks only. So the way we use dispatch hook is by creating a dispatch function. The use dispatch hook basically returns a dispatch function to us, a hook to access the Redux dispatch function. So as I said, this hook allows you to access the dispatch function that is part of the Redux library. Okay, so it doesn't accept anything. It just gives you a dispatch function, and then you can use this dispatch function to change things, to do things, to dispatch actions based on user interaction. Okay, so I'll write that interaction in the buttons on click. So whenever this button is clicked, so in the on click, I can write a function which will dispatch something. Okay, and this something is the action that we created here. Okay, so I'll import that action now, and it was a named import, so I'll write import something from dot slash again, store slash config slash actions. And in here, the thing that we want to import is toggle unit. I'll go down here and we'll dispatch toggle unit. And since this is a function, so I need to call it. So we are dispatching toggle unit. All right. If we had any parameters that are that are needed to be sent with this action, we can send them. We can send them to this function over here, and then in here we can do payload, and then we can attach that payload to here like this. Okay, and this can be concise to just writing payload. So you can do that as well, but this function won't have any payload, so I'm just removing it for now. So with just this, the unit toggle should work in theory, at least in the console. So if I click on it, and yeah, the state is being changed because this function is this particular header component is being re-rendered again and again, and the state is changing. So this thing is working fine now, right? So we can use this to actually change these the icons over here, the backgrounds over here, and we can also use this in the API call that we are sending through. So let's just do that now. So the state can either so this is the Redux state. I'll actually name it.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm getting an error.
Okay, what's the
Too
error?
many re-renders, React limits number of re-renders to prevent an infinite loop.
Okay. If you're having too many re-renders, then it means that you are dispatching this outside of like you're doing this somewhere over here. Like you don't want to, you should not use the dispatch function outside of the return. because then whenever re-render happens, the dispatch will happen again and again and again. So it forms like an infinite loop over there. So are you doing something like that?
Right, I didn't put it the way you did. I just directly passed in the dispatch.
Okay, okay. Yeah, you need to add that in on click. So only when the click happens on the button, the dispatch should go through.
Right, right, I changed that. Now it's okay.
Yeah. So now, so since we have now created this function, obviously there is something called separation of concerns that we talked about at a very early stage of this session, these sessions. So another thing where you would want to separate concerns is you need to always separate your UI from your business logic. Okay. So the way we can do that here is, because our business logic is basically mixed in with the UI, right? So the way we do that here is by copying this function and defining this as a separate function at the top. So I'll do const and I'll call this handle toggle, okay, equals to, or if you want to name it more precisely, you can say handle toggle unit, and equals to, and this is the function, and this is basically the event handler, right? So that is why it starts with handle. Any kind of event handler you are writing, you should always start them with a handle, so you are able to identify that, yeah, this is an event handler function. Okay. And then I'll just pass it over here on the on click. So every time the click happens, this function is called. All right. So with just this, this is working, and the toggle is also happening over here. So I'll just use that now for changing this class name and like, yeah, so for basically changing this class name in both of these scenarios. Okay. So in both of these cases, I want the class name to be a JavaScript expression, first of all, and I would want to rename this state. So I'll call it unit state. Okay. And we're logging unit state as well. And in here, I would write an expression like unit state equals imperial. If it is imperial, then this should be active, else it should be inactive. Similarly, over here, I want to write the same thing. I'll just copy it, paste it here. And unit state equals to metric, then it should be active, else it should be inactive. Are you guys following so far?
Yes, sir.
All right. What about you and Arvind and
Yes,
Ritik?
sir.
Okay. Okay. All
Yes,
right.
I'm
So after
so
this,
it's
if I start clicking on,
so
all right. Okay. Okay. Okay, Ritik. Okay, so after this, if you start clicking, you'll see that the toggle is happening over here, and like the state is actually affecting the UI. So I think everything's working properly. So now we can actually structure our state in a better way, because currently, if you see from the whole Redux state, you can directly get to the unit, and this doesn't really add up, right? Because what's the unit? What is it for? Like what kind of unit it is? So you need to structure your state properly so that you don't get lost in the global states that you have created for your application, because in a complex application you'll have multiple, like you'll have tens of states, right? So you need to structure this properly. So the way we do it is, first of all, before doing that, I'll just create a dumb reducer for the location and a dumb actions file for the location as well. So I'll just copy paste what I created for config, and I'll remove this, and I'll remove this case. And so this is basically a dumb reducer, and I'll rename it as well. So instead of config reducer, it should be location reducer. Okay. So so this is basically a dumb reducer, because it doesn't do anything and it doesn't hold any particular state. It's basically a dumb reducer which is just there. We can fill this up later on, but for now I'll just leave it empty. And then what we can do is, inside the store folder itself, we want to combine all of the different states that we create here. There can be multiple different folders, each for different types of states. So we can combine them all in a root reducer. So I'll just call it index.js. Okay. So this index.js inside the store will hold the root reducer, which is basically like the my computer of of your Redux state. So from my computer, you can go to different drives and different kinds of network drives and all, right. Similarly, from the root reducer, you can go to any kind of states. Okay. So I'll import something from Redux. and this something is combine reducers. This combine reducers is the function that actually turns multiple reducers into a single root reducer. Okay, and then also import create store over here. Why? Because once we form the reduce combine all the reducers, we can basically create the stores right over here and export it, and then we can use that store directly in here, right? So in that way, all the code related to Redux will be stored in one single folder, and you don't need to write this anymore, because we would create the store from the root reducer, right? From the index.js. So what I'll do is I'll write const root reducer root reducer. Hold on, sorry for the typos. Const root reducer equals to, and I'll write combine reducer, and this is a function which basically accepts an object that is like a set of all the reducers. Okay, so the first reducer is config, so the property name I would call config. uh, Guys, can you hold on? I've got a delivery that I need to take. Like, let's just take a small break over here. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Okay, bro.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Okay, so yeah, as I was saying, so we in our application we have two different reducers, which is the config reducer and the location reducer, right? So when we are selecting a particular state using the use selector, like we did here, we can specify each of these reducers. When once we combine them, we can specify them by using something like this. So inside state, I want to get into the config state, and then inside there, I want to get into the unit. Or maybe inside state, I want to get into the location state, and then inside there, I want to get into the active location. Okay, or just active because location is already there. So yeah, just active. So that is what I'm structuring for now. So here we can specify in config the config reducer. So I'll import that now. Import config reducer from config slash reducer. So it automatically got that. And similarly, import location reducer from location slash reducer. Okay. So I think this is also the path is correct. Yeah. So location slash reducer. So then I can specify that the config property holds the config reducer, and the location property hold the location reducer. All right. So this is the root reducer. Now we can create store using this root reducer. So I'll do const store equals to, or redux store equals to create store root reducer. All right, and then finally we can export it, so we can import it in this index.js. Okay, so I can do export default redux store, because this is what we are interested in. Finally, we don't work with reducers, we work with the store. Okay, so I can close this now, and I'll go to my index.js, and there I can remove this create store, create store import, and I can remove this config reducer as well. All I need to import is the whole store. So I'll import redux store. It was a default export there, right? So I'm importing it using default import as well. So create import redux store from dot slash store slash index. And here I would like to explain a ES6 property. Like ES6 is the newest version, the modern version of JavaScript. So one thing that you can do is, whenever you want to import something from a folder and that something is named index, you can safely just remove that index keyword at the end, and it will automatically import the index file from that folder. Okay, so I'll just import redux store from dot slash store, and then in this provider I can specify that redux store. All right, once I hit save and I go back here, and I'll just check it. So this is selecting the correct state or not. So yeah, this is selecting the correct state. Let's just see if it works or not. It's giving me an error because during writing this, I saved it multiple times, and at that time it was throwing an error maybe. So I'll just refresh it, and now if I click it, so yeah, the state is being selected properly even after combining all the reducers. So now I'll just close this down. Now let's start working on, let's just start by structuring the location reducer a bit. Okay, so in the locations, what all do we need to store? That's the first thing that we need to think about. The first thing that we need to store is the active location, right? So the active location by default should be the element of the index, or a zeroth index of the array. And what array are we talking about? So we are talking about the preferred or selected locations. What should we call it? We should call it, I'll just call it preferred. All right. So this is an array of all the selected locations that the user the user has. Okay. So so these are the two things that I want to store inside the location reducer state. And then let's move on to the actions that we can fire for this particular reducer. So the first action that I want to fire is set active location. So I'll write const set active location, okay, equals to, and this will get a prop or we can make more precise actions for this. So we can do next location. This is one action that we can fire. Okay. And this should be a function, and then we can have a previous location. Okay. Then we can have a add preferred, add to preferred locations. Okay. And this should be a const, and then what we actually want to add to preferred locations that we can get here. So I'll call it location, or maybe name. All right. And then we can have const delete from preferred locations. And this will also have a name because it can't delete without a name. All right. So we can also we also need to export all of this. So I'll just click at I'll just all click at the start of each of these and write export. Okay. So with this, we can start working on the payload, like what each of these should return. So the next location will only need to return the action that it is firing, and then we can handle like what value the next location would be based on from the reducer itself. Okay. So here I'll just write the type should be location next location. I know it sounds a little weird, but that's fine. So, and then here I can write previous location. Okay. And here we can do return type would be uh, location add location, or we don't need this because this is redundant. So we can just remove this. Okay. Previous next, then this action type would be location add, and we also have a payload with this, right? So in the payload, you can actually name this anything. Usually people name it payload, but you can also like pass extra properties without actually specifying the payload. So you can either do this and then pass the properties like an object, or you can pass the properties directly like this. Okay. So you can do this as well. So this is what I prefer. So I'll just pass the name like this, and then in here as well I'll do the same thing, but except that here it should be delete and delete by name. Okay. With just these four actions, we can handle these actions over here. So I'll just copy each of these, and in here I can specify different cases for each of them. So for next location, sorry, there should be in a string. So next location would be a case, then there would be multiple different cases. One would be location previous, one should be location add, and one should be location delete. Okay. In the next one, what I'll do is I'll return obviously a new state. So I'll unwrap the old state again using the spread operator. Okay. Then for the active location value, its value, what we can do is we can write a simple ternary operator. And if you're not comfortable with ternary operators, you can obviously do all the calculation beforehand, and then you can simply put that over here. So I'll first show it using a ternary operator. Okay. Or let's just do it with an if statement first of all. So I'll do let new location new active. Okay. Let new active equals to active plus plus, because when we are clicking next, the next new active would be the next number, right? But in just one scenario, it won't be the next number, and that scenario is when the active is actually pointing to the last element of that array. In that case, when we are clicking next, it should cycle back to the first item, right? So what we'll do is if new active, and if new active's value has grown bigger than preferred, if it has grown bigger than state dot preferred, hold on, state dot preferred dot length. if it has grown equal to or greater than state.preferred.length, so it has basically gone beyond the index ranges that is possible, then in that case we'll set new active to 0. Okay, and so this will basically handle the like edge case scenario that we can face when someone is clicking next again and again. So it will basically cycle back to the 0th element, and now we can set this to active over here. Okay, and so this active plus plus won't work exactly because like this is not a variable here. So what we need to do is state dot active plus 1. That is the value of new active, and then we reset it to 0 if this new active value is greater than or equal to the length of the array. Okay, so similarly for previous as well, we can do, I'll just copy this whole thing. And for previous, this should be -1, and this condition should basically be when it has gone below 0, because there won't be any index below 0, right? So I'll just write less than 0. Then in that case, new active should be state dot preferred. It should be the last element, right? So that the last element is represented by length -1. So state dot preferred dot length -1, and this is the new active. So these are the handling cases for location next and location previous. These actions would be fired when when the left arrow or the right arrow are pressed. And now we'll add the functionality for location add and location delete, and this would be like very simple. Like location add at least would be very simple. What we need to do is we need to return so we need to return the new state first of all. And one more thing that we can do here is that this name is obviously like it's required always, right? So if at any given point of time you don't specify a name, then this would basically be undefined. Okay, so name would be undefined. So if we try to add undefined to the end of of the preferred array, then nothing would be added to the end of it. Okay, so we are safe here. But if there are cases where like a structure like this might give you an error, then you need to think of those edge cases as well. But for now we are safe here. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so the state like we spread the current state into the new state, and then we change the preferred location. So the way we change the preferred location is the new preferred location array. It would be an array still, and the new preferred location array will basically be, since we're adding a new location, right? So it will basically be an array that holds all the previous preferred locations. So that is state.preferred. This is all the previous locations that was selected by the user, and then at the end at the end it would be action dot name, and this name will basically hold the new location name, right? So this whole thing will be the new preferred newly added location. All right, and then finally in here we can do return. This is for delete, right? So delete would be a little more tricky, because for delete we need to find that location in this preferred array, and we need to remove that location, right? So for removing something, my go-to is always using the filter function. Like arrays in JavaScript has a filter function. That's what I use to remove things from the array. Okay, so I'll just do that here. What I'll do is I'll make a copy of that array. I'll write const preferred equals to, and this will be a copy of the like earlier preferred location array. So I'll just spread the whole thing, and I'm making a copy here, right? So I'll just do that. Then uh, actually this should not be const, because I'll now change it here. So preferred is now equals to preferred dot filter. I'm filtering the whole array. And how am I filtering? So like if and each of the items in this array is a location. So the filter function basically takes a callback function which when returns true, it will add that particular item to the new array, and if it returns false, then it will filter it out. Okay, so I want to remove the location which has the name equals to this action.name, right? So I'll do lock name over here. Okay, so when action.name is not equals to lock name, then I need to then it will get filtered out. It will be added to this preferred location. And if it is equals to if these two are actually equal, then that won't be added to this preferred location. Okay, so that's what will happen here. And then this preferred location will have there would be an array where this particular location is not there. Okay, so I'll just return the new state now, and the new state is the older state, and then so the new state would be the older state, then preferred colon the preferred thing, and the shorthand for this is basically this. So when the property name and the value name is same, then you can basically use the shorthand. All right, so this is the whole location reducer complete. Okay, all right, so with this we can actually start using it now. So it's giving me an error. New active has already been declared. Okay, let's see where is it being declared. So okay, so it's actually declared here, and then I'm redeclaring it over here. That's why it's giving me an error. So instead of doing this, what we can do is, uh, okay, let's see what we can actually do. So I'll just name them differently for now. Okay, so for this, I'll name it new next location, or I'll just call it next location. So next location, and for this I'll call it, so I'll call it priv location. Okay, and this is why this is actually why ternary operators are very helpful over here, because what we can do when we're using ternary operators is that we can simply ignore all the variable declarations and directly write the whole expression right here. So for I'll just give you an example. For previous location, I can directly write that over here. So the way we write it is, basically when the previous location is less than 0, then the thing changes, right? This expression changes. So if it is less than 0, then in that case the previous location would be this thing, else it would be this thing. And that's it. We can safely comment this out. And so previous location was basically state.active -1, right? So I'll write it over here. So if if the current state, the current location -1 is less than 0, if it is going below 0, then we'll set this active value to length -1. Else, if it is not below 0, then we can set it to -1. Okay. All right. So you can also write this in the same way, but I just did this for an example. All right. So with this, I can safely close this and close this as well. And we can start using these values. I'll just refresh this. And we can start using these values over here in the location selector. So let's just do that. And before that, let's just make that particular change that is happening over here actually change the API calls. Okay. So the way we do it is, remember yesterday we talked about use effect and how use effect only fires at the first of all at the first render, and then every time this dependency array changes. So everything in this dependency array, whenever they change, this use effect function is fired again. So this is like a side effect that happens when states get updated, and the side effect can keep track of a particular state using this dependency array and then change based on what states are changing, right? So the reason why I use added this provider in the index.js is that I can get access to this provider in the app.js over here. Okay, that is the only reason why you added this provider here. So if I had used this provider in here, like over here, then app.js won't have access to it, but all of its children would have had access to that particular Redux state. So now we have the access to those Redux states that we defined over here. So I'll just use import use selector to from React Redux to actually select that state. So I'll write const unit state equals to use selector state. From state I need to get state dot config dot unit. Okay, and then this unit state can be plugged over here so that whenever unit state is updated, this function is called again. So earlier it was only being called on the first render only, right? But once I plug this over here, this whole function will run on the first render, and along with that, every time unit state changes. So unit state will only change when we click that button, so this function will be called again whenever we click that toggle button. Okay, that is why I'm adding this to the dependency array. Now I can go here, and instead of units metric, I can write dollar curly braces and unit state. Okay, similarly I can do the same thing over here in the air, or maybe not, because the air data that we are getting is not really unit specific. So the units are only for the first API that we use, the current weather API. So with this, we can save it. And so now you can see the unit is coming in Fahrenheit. And if I change this, the unit is coming in Celsius. And the API call is going really fast. That's why it's updating really quickly. So now you can see that this is being updated properly for both Fahrenheit and Celsius. You can also change these text over here, and you can also do that in the same way. You can just take this selector and paste it everywhere.
And that ternary operator.
Yeah, exactly. So you can use a ternary operator, and you can change that string everywhere. So I'll just show you an example in the sidebar. So I'll import this thing, and then I'll use the unit state down here to change this degree Celsius. Okay, so degree is fine because degree will always be there. But for Celsius, what I can do is when unit state equals metric, then in that case, if it is equals to metric, then in that case it should be C, else it should be Fahrenheit. So this is the like expression that we need to write, and we can copy paste this everywhere we want. So after this, it's also at feels like. So I'll change this to this, and it's also in all of these places. So you can do that as well. Like you can change all wherever it actually makes a difference. So now if I hit save and I refresh, so you'll see that it changes to Fahrenheit, right? And it's also obviously these cards are not changing because I haven't made I'm not sending that data to all of these cards, but they will also get updated. Okay, so now you must have already noticed that one thing that I mentioned earlier I'm not actually doing, and that is that I'm not storing the the weather data for each of these locations, and we should actually do that. And with just this much information, you'd be I think you should be comfortable to create a new create a new new reducer over here for storing the weather data for each of the locations. And feel free to try out different ways to do that. Maybe you can create a new reducer, or maybe you can use just the location reducer to also store the weather data for each of the locations. But for now, I'm just happy with this. And what I can do is now I can use that location reducer that we made over here in this area. So what I'll do is I'll go to the location selector, and in the location selector I'll write a use selector hook. So I'll write const location state equals to use selector, and state. From state I need state dot location, and then I can use this location state to do things over here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to show that particular state. Okay, so each of the locations will not just be the name but also the country. Okay, so that's how I want to store it. So this particular reducer that I made, this preferred array will not only store the name of the locations, but also the country and a few more things. So I think we'll need to actually change this over here, but for now it's fine. Let's just see how we are actually getting the locations. Okay, that's the first thing that we need to do. So the way that we are getting it is by is through this ID over here. So this ID is basically I think the location ID for where we are getting the the data and all, like the weather data. So we can store this as well, and that will be used for actually deleting everything. And we can get all of that name and country like regarding to the current location based on whatever we are storing in the JSONs over here. So each location will not just be a string, but JSON that will contain a few more things than just a string. All right. So, but at the first thing that we need to handle is that the preferred location might be empty, and in that case, we need to, instead of showing just left and right button, we need to show some kind of hint. So when the preferred location is empty, we need to show a tooltip that you can start searching for places. Okay. So I'll do that right now. What I'll do is, uh, actually not here. I'll do that in the whole sidebar and the whole main bar as well. So I'll just write that no location added. Start by adding a location. Okay, so we can do that. So the way we do it is, first things first, go to the sidebar, or not the sidebar. First, the first thing that we need to do is like hide this whole thing, like this whole bottom part. Just show the search bar. So I'll just hide everything over here except the search bar, based on if the preferred array is empty or not empty. Okay. So what I'll do is, I'll select this whole thing and wrap them in an expression, and then at the very start, you write another use selector, location state, to get the states related to the location. I'll write state dot location, and in the location state, I can check for preferred. So location state dot preferred equals dot length equals 0. So if the length is 0, then in that case we don't need to show this. So instead of this, it should be greater than 0. So whenever this particular location state.prefer.length is greater than 0, then this whole thing won't be shown, and it is giving me an error because it has to be a single a single React node, and not multiple different React elements. So we can do that by wrapping it in a empty fragment. This is called an you know empty component, or in other words, it's also called a fragment in React. So the other way to write it is like this, react.fragment. But I prefer, using just the set of empty chevrons. So this is a single node, and then inside this, I can paste it. So what this is used for is just grouping elements into a single parent. So with this kind of syntax, we are basically grouping everything into a single parent. So we can write this expression over here for conditionally rendering these elements. Okay. So when preferred.length is greater than 0, then only we want to show this. So now you'll see that the whole sidebar is gone, because obviously there is no preferred location set, so it won't show that weather data as well. Similarly, we can do that for the stats as well. So actually in the stats, we can remove everything, and each of the cards can be removed easily. I'll just select the whole thing and write the same expression. Okay, paste it over here, and I'll actually you write the use selector for this. Const location state equals to use selector, and I'll import it, and I'll write state dot location. Okay, so in here, then I can I'll be able to basically conditionally render this whole thing. So now you'll see that everything is gone. And instead of today's highlights, what we can do is, based on whether we actually have a location or not, we can show a tooltip. Okay. So what we can do is, I'll write a ternary operator over here. So now we are using a ternary operator to conditionally show either one div element, either one HTML element or the other HTML element. Okay. So this one would be called, it would have a class name of tooltip, okay, or hint maybe, and it will have no location selected. start by adding a location. So this is a tooltip that I want to show. Now I can style it easily. Obviously, it will start showing it here. So now I'll style it here in my style component. And inside here, I can first thing first specify font size of 14 pt and color of gray. So hash 888, and then I'll also add a margin top of 2 rems. Okay, I'm happy with this. So this is the hint that I'm getting. And once we start adding multiple locations, it will actually update the preferred locations array, right? So then it will start showing the actual locations over. It will actually at least start showing the result over here. Okay, so the way we do that is, all right. So obviously, like the reducer that we wrote over here is very very simple. Instead of having the index over here, what we can do is we can have the actual location data that we want to show, right? So all of that can be stored inside this location, inside the preferred itself. So the structure for this preferred can be like something like this. So the ID of the location, then the name of the location that will be shown at the location selector down at the bottom. Then we can have the data for this location. Okay, so this way what happens is that we are creating a structure that we can reuse and again. And for the active, we can actually just have one copy of one such location from this preferred location. So that will actually apply to the active every time the next or previous button is pressed. And that way what we are doing is we are actually removing clutter from everywhere. So currently, like the current way that we have structured this, whenever we want to get to the active location, what we need to do is we need to write preferred location square bracket active location. And instead of this, I just want to write active location to get the data related to the active location. That is why instead of saving the index, I want to save the whole thing, like the whole data. And we can do that easily. Like instead of returning, so in if you look at the previous and the next part, we are actually returning the index here, right? So for active, we are returning the 0th index here. So instead of doing that, we can do state dot preferred, and then in here we can do next lock. Okay, so this will actually if I've written it correctly, then this should happen. That hold on. So this will now correctly select the select the active location data, and that is what will be stored in the active over here. So at first the active would be null because there is no preferred location, so there should be no active location as well. So that is why this is null. And then similarly, like how I've done it over here, I can do the same thing over here as well, but here it's a little more complex, right? So I'll actually uncomment this again just to make things cleaner. And then here I can write active colon state dot preferred, and this should be prev location. Okay. And for some reason my IntelliSense is not working, and I hope that yours is, because like there's room for a lot of errors over here. So with just this, like I think like these two previous location and the next location functions are over. Like action handlers are over. And similarly for the add and delete also, we'll need to look at what we are actually adding to the preferred array at the very end. So now this time around, we are not just adding the name, but we'll be also be getting like in their actions, we'll also be getting like their ID and the data related to it. But when we are deleting it, we actually delete it only just by their name. So I'll pass this over here, and in here also I'll pass the ID and the data related to it. So whenever we add a new location, we are not just adding the location, but also its ID that we are getting from Open Weather API, and the data that we got, like the whole weather data that we got from the API call. Okay, And in here also, when we are deleting just by the id, because that's how, like, because ids are unique for each of the location points all over the world. Okay. So then when we are actually creating this location ad, we are not just adding the name, we are adding the whole object. So this would be name colon action dot name, then id colon action dot id, and finally the last thing should be data. So data colon action dot data. All right. So this is one location entity. This whole object represents one particular location and its data along with its ID. Okay. And when we are deleting it, again, we would obviously still use the filter function to, but this time around, this is not just location name. This is the whole location, like each location. And for each location, I'll check. For deleting, we are only getting the id, right? Like the id is being passed to the reducer. So for here, I'll check action.id not equals. There should be location dot uh, location dot hold on, let's see. Yeah, location dot id, because each location will have three properties: name, id, and data. So I want to delete by id, right? So it will actually delete by id now. And then this is the new preferred array. So like I'll spread the state and add the new preferred array. Okay. We can actually rename these to have like we can actually rename these to be more meaningful. So add preferred location, that's what I want to call it, and delete location by id. This is what I want to call this. Okay. So now we have formed like both like the reducer and the actions, and we can use this now. So but we are already ahead of time, so we'll actually look into this tomorrow onwards. But I think this is like a lot of a lot of new concepts to process. So I hope like all of it made sense for today. And if you guys have any questions, you feel free to ask me. uh, I know that there must be a lot of different confusing terms that we came across today. So feel free to ask me questions.
It was just
Yeah,
a bit to take in.
yeah. Like I know, it's like it's a little too much even for me. Like every time I use Redux, the setup part, the initial setup part is like a little, a little too much for remembering. So it's fine if you are able to do it by based on the documentation. But apart from that, like the concepts and all, this only gets easy to understand with practice. So I'll obviously share all of this to the GitHub repo. I'll actually push this right now. Uh, I'll write added global state. So another thing about Redux is that Redux was the one of the first global state management libraries that came out for React. That is why it's like it has its popularity and a separate place in the market. But apart from that, it doesn't hold any extra significance. There are many much better and much simpler global state management libraries out there. Like one of like two of them that I remember right off the top of my head is, one is Recoil, and this is also made by the team behind React itself. So this is another global state management library, and it's much simpler to use than Redux. And one is called Easy Peasy. So this is like really easy to use. If I can name it properly. Yeah. So this is another global state management library, and the way you create store in this is very easy. You just write create store and you specify all of your states over here, and like it's much simpler than structuring Redux inside your application. For Redux, you have to specify actions and reducers, then combine them, then finally use them in a provider. And EasyPC makes that much more simpler. So
I was thinking for
I
the like we'll be having the preferred locations, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All that will it will be empty when the user comes first time to the website.
Yes, exactly.
Then when he searches, then it will get added. But then suppose he closes that particular tab and then comes back again, so it will go back to empty, right?
Yeah, it will go back to empty. And for that, like, do you know already like what you can
Local
do for it?
storage, right?
Yeah, exactly. So tomorrow, when we actually start implementing the search bar, we'll look into how we can store the Redux state into local storage. So every time the reducer is fired, it will actually also store the whole thing into local storage, and that way, the state will always be there whenever you reload the application or close the tab and open it again.
And we had to add one more uh, ternary condition, like if it's local storage dot get item, if it's that,
Yeah.
then get it. Else local storage dot set item. Make a
Mm-hmm.
new.
Yeah, exactly. So, like the ternary would actually be for the initial state. So, for now, like what we are using a constant initial state, right? But that
Okay.
initial state can also be taken from local storage. I mean, that's what we need to do. Like, if we have something in the local storage, then we take that initial state from the local storage. Else, the initial state that we defined in the file, like in the reducer itself. That's what we need to do for the location reducer and for the unit reducer as well. I mean, the config reducer as well.
Yes, I think I want to try adding